Hello, my name is Natalie and I'm currently taking English Language and Literature Standard Level. Today I'll be completing a practice IOC based on Alice Munro's short story titled Runaway. So Runaway is a short story written in 2004 and it is one of Munro's more recent stories. It comes from her short story collection also titled Runaway. Since the short story collection and this short story share the same name, Munro most probably views it as the most significant in the whole collection. So a unifying feature of the 8 stories in the collection is that all the protagonists are females, a typical characteristic of Munro's stories, and each protagonist is trying to escape from something. In the case of Runaway, the female protagonist, Carla, is trying to escape from her bad marriage. When Munro was writing this story, she was living with her second husband on a farm, and her first marriage would have provided inspiration for Munro to write this story because her divorce would also mean that she was trying to escape from an unsuccessful relationship. So the passage occurs towards the end of the story, and leading up to this passage, Clark visited Sylvia, his neighbor, to return her the clothes that Carla borrowed when she attempted to run away. And so the idea, this passage is about Sylvia and Clark having a conversation until Flora, the goat that had disappeared since the beginning of the story, appears once again. And this passage, or the whole story, is written in a third-person narrator, so we get an overall insight into the characters' feelings, and the tone the narrator used is one that is very dramatic but also very sentimental at the same time, and this will be explained further in my analysis of the passage later. So the structure of this passage is a mix of dialogue and exposition, but leans more towards dialogue. And so because it is mostly dialogue, the lines are split up one after another, and there is very little large chunks of exposition. So the main idea of the passage is to contribute to the following action of the story and to highlight the parallels between Flora and Carla. And although Clark is a vicious man throughout the story, this passage shows another side to Clark when Flora reappears, and this shows the development of his character. So for this commentary, I will be doing it sequentially. So the passage starts off with a short exposition, and the first line of it says, "Then the vision exploded." So in Runaway, the narrator adds a lot of suspense, and in this very line, the readers can easily sense this suspense Munro creates through the use of the word exploded. Although it is just a goat coming out of the fog, Munro purposefully uses a strong word to describe it. And so this is because Flora acts as a parallel to the protagonist, Carla, so much emphasis is placed on it. And the suspense built up by Munro through the word exploded allows the readers to still be engaged with the story, even though the climax has already occurred. And Munro then uses repetition by saying "out of the fog" and "out of the magnifying light." So this repetition has the effect of stressing the appearance of the goat once again. And, as I said, a lot of emphasis is placed on the goat as a character. And so when the goat returns after running away, it mimics how Carla, the protagonist, also returns to Clark after failing to run away. Then afterwards it says, "now revealed to be that of a car traveling along this back road, probably in search of a place to park." So this line adds like a halt to the dramatic scene because since this is one of Munro's more climatic stories, Munro adds this in order to retain her realistic flair, like most of her other stories. And then afterwards it says it describes Flora as a little dancing white goat. So dancing has a positive connotation to it. And the fact that Flora is attributed with this action, with this positive action, it reveals to the readers that Flora is happy to have returned back to her owner, which is Clark. And then we can also see that since Flora and Carla are parallels of each other, the readers can assume that Carla was also much happier to have returned home than if she were to run away, and which is why she failed to escape. So the personification of Flora dancing also helps the reader sympathize with the goat because the goat is being objectified in a humanly manner. Munro then compares the size of Flora to a sheepdog, and since the story was written in quite modern times, the readers wouldn't have been unfamiliar with the size of a goat, or much less even a goat, and so Munro uses a domestic animal to help the audience visualize Flora better. Then Clark poses a rhetorical question by saying, "Where the Christ did you come from?" And this is a rhetorical question because the goat cannot answer, but this is placed in the story to emphasize the fact that Flora had disappeared. Then Sylvia says, "It's your goat," but then she repeats this again by saying, "Isn't it your goat?" Which is a rhetorical question because she had already answered herself previously. And the effect of using this rhetorical question is once again to emphasize the fact that Flora is Clark's goat. Then Clark repeats Flora twice, and this repetition is used to express his disbelief and to make a point to the audience that Clark is in great shock for having seen Flora. Then it describes how Flora had stopped a yard or so away from them, had turned shy, and hung her head. And so this action could help the audience imagine that this was how Carla acted when she first saw Clark after her failure to run away. And so because this scene is omitted in the story, we are only left with this clue to help imagine how Carla acted around Clark. Clark repeats Flora's name once more and then repeats, "Where the hell did you come from?" similar to the first rhetorical question he asked, "Where the Christ did you come from?" The profanity in the following sentence is included by Munro so that the audience can relate to the story better because many people these days use profanity in their everyday life. And then following that, the word "us" is italicized to display its significance because it shows that the runaway of Flora has tied Carla and Clark together because Flora was only ever described as one person's entity, but now it is being described as both the husband and the wife's entity. And so similarly, it could also mean that the runaway of Carla has brought the husband and wife closer. Clark then says, "Goddamn stupid animal," but he contradicts himself because he says it as if he was not fond of Flora at all, but because he says it in a shakily manner, it illustrates that Clark was concerned for Flora, which is quite different to his usual rash personality. And so likewise, we can apply this situation to Carla, in which Clark could have very well acted the same way. Sylvia says that she was lost, and Clark agrees by saying, "Yeah, she was." And this is a rather peaceful conversation between the two of them, and it shows the progress in their relationship because of Flora, or in other words, Carla. And before this passage, they were having a rather hostile conversation. When the moonlight caught a glitter in Flora's eyes, it represents the naivety that both Flora and Carla have, which is why they failed to run away. Then after that, there's still a rather peaceful conversation between Flora and Clark. Clark describes Flora as a goat from outer space, and he repeats this twice. And so quite obviously, Munro uses a lot of repetition, indirectly and directly, and this is to symbolize the theme of the entire story, which is the fear of change, which is why words are being repeated again and again a number of times. The goat from outer space reflects that Flora possesses some sort of modern thinking, which in Clark's perspective is her running away. Since this story is set in a small rural town, fast-forward thinking is not prevalent, and the running away of both Carla and Flora infers such ideas. When Clark pats Flora, Flora allows him to do so, but when Sylvia attempts to pat her, she backs away, and this signifies that Flora is more comfortable with Clark, and thus the readers can deduce that Carla is also more comfortable being with Clark than being with Sylvia, who helped her run away. And Clark reiterates once more that goats are unpredictable, and goes on to say that they can seem tame, but they're not really. This is in parallel to Carla, who at first seemed tame as she was always following Clark around. And at the beginning, we also saw how Flora followed Clark around, and due to their actions, Clark never expected either characters to run away. When Sylvia asks, is she grown up, to reconfirm what Clark said previously, it symbolizes the position of both Flora and Carla. Despite both characters being adults, they are still small figuratively. Their fear is what makes them small, which is why they both return to Clark, having failed to escape. When Clark says that Flora is as big as she's ever going to get, it shows that both Carla and Flora will be unable to get rid of their fear and achieve freedom. And then after that, it shows Munro describes Sylvia and Clark looking down at Flora, and this action depicts Flora as a powerless animal, much like Carla, who is powerless to do anything because her fear overwhelms her. Sylvia believes that she might have seen a shadow of regret in Clark's eyes. Sylvia's perspective on Clark discloses to the audience that there's more than what meets the eye in reference to Clark. And this shows the development of Clark as a character only in this passage because at the end of the story, we still see Clark as a vicious man who murdered Flora. And then the fact that Sylvia thinks this had just been an ordinary visit relieves all the remaining tension between the two characters. And so once again, this contributes to the falling action of the story. Then, when Clark tells Flora it is time to go home, he uses a warm and inviting tone, and so this mimics the scene where Carla asks Clark to take her home over the phone, and Clark replies with an okay. So to conclude, the main idea of the passage is to showcase the falling action of the story by showing Clark's development as a character and the lack of misunderstanding and tension between Sylvia and Clark. It is also used to emphasize the significance of Flora as a parallel to Carla. Thank you.